Okay. Welcome to the House Progressive Caucus weekly public caucus. We're in room 44 in the State House. It's Tuesday, January 28th, 2025. Representative Brian Chino, our assistant leader, will be facilitating today. So I'll start off with announcements from our leadership team this morning before I hand it off to Representative Chino. This week, there will be a normal floor schedule. The governor's budget address, as we know, is at 1 p.m. So we need to wrap up on time so that we can all be on the floor by 1 p.m. We already saw today that the Australian ballot bill is going to be quickly passed through the legislature so that towns are ready for town meeting day. The Committee on Energy and Digital Infrastructure has moved. That was room 41 on this floor, and will now be next to Judiciary. But they are their room is currently filled with security today, so there might be folks coming in and out of this room because this is where everyone's been storing their things today. Also, the Transportation Committee Assistant had to resign from her role on Friday. In the meantime, the role will be filled by a Senate Committee Assistant before they hire someone to replace Transportation. Yeah. Okay. Yes, your committee. Also this weekend, the mezzanine move will happen. So government operations and education committees will be moving to the mezzanine. And then it'll take another week to get rooms 10 and 11 turned back into meeting rooms. Those new committee rooms are going to be accessible through the loading dock stairs and elevators off the ground floor by the building. And that is it for announcements. Any questions on the announcements? No? Okay. So now I will pass facilitation over to Representative Chino.
Okay, so hello everyone online and thanks everyone for coming in person who's here. Today our topic is going to be the public health emergency of the housing crisis. Currently, we are facing an unprecedented level of unsheltered homelessness in Vermont. And this is happening at a time where we're seeing a convergence of a housing shortage, a polysubstance pandemic, unlike anything we've seen in terms of the substances that are on the streets and in the towns and villages of Vermont right now. We've seen a series of ecological disasters, and we're going to see more. And we're coming out of a global pandemic of COVID-19 that was not handled properly on the state or federal level. And so we're under these dire conditions. We're seeing record levels of unsheltered homelessness. And we know that housing is an important social determinant of health. Housing first interventions to individuals with chronic health conditions can result in improved health outcomes, as well as lower crime rates and improved quality of life for communities. This housing shortage is disproportionately affecting people with disabilities, people of color, and LGBTQ+ people. And for at least 4 years, if not longer, Vermont has had the opportunity. So when the pandemic hit, Vermont essentially ended unsheltered homelessness as we knew it in the name of public health. But what's clear at this point is that this wasn't about protecting those who are unsheltered and homeless. It was about protecting everyone else from the people who might, from those people. I mean, that's really clear that's what the decision was about at this point with the current administration. So the caucus has decided to make space today to discuss this crisis and brought in some advocates and who have on the ground frontline experience. And so the format we're going to use is I'm going to ask a question and then our guests will each have a minute or two to weigh in on it. And we have some guests who aren't here yet, so they'll jump in when they make it. And so I sent out these questions. I'm just going to put them up on the screen because the first one though is if you could say who you are, what your organization is, what your role is, and your mission in a minute or two. Maybe we'll start to my right here.
I'm Brenda Siegel, and I'm the Executive Director of End Homelessness Vermont. We are a lived experience led organization that has two departments. We have one that's the Office of Housing Advocate, and the other department is Research and Advocacy. We are very engaged. We will help people at the point of an emergency, but we also primarily work long-term with people with complex needs and disabilities. And we follow people from emergency housing through the entire process and into their permanent housing, and we stay with them after they're housed. Or if they're unsheltered, we also continue to work with them as well. Jen, did I cover it?
Yeah, I think
Okay, okay.
so Frank, maybe you can go next.
Sure. Hey, y'all. Thanks for the invitation. Frank Tunak, pronouns with the Housing and Homelessness Alliance of Vermont. We are the result of a merger between the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition and the Vermont Coalition to End Homelessness. We came together as a newly merged organization 2 summers ago. And we wear 2 hats. One hat is engaging in advocacy and culture change work around housing, homelessness, services, all the intersecting issues. So we engage at the federal, state, and local levels around those issues. And our second hat is we are the collaborative applicant for the Balance of State Continuum of Care. And for those not familiar with Continuum of Care, each state has one or more HUD designated continuum of care, which serves as a homelessness response infrastructure for the state or for that jurisdiction. In Vermont, we have 2 continuum of care. We have the Chittenden County Homeless Alliance, which is the continuum of care for Chittenden County. And then we have the Balance of State Continuum of Care, which is the continuum of care for the rest of Vermont. And we, as the collaborative applicant for the Balance of State, we functionally staff the Balance of State Continuum of Care. So work with the leadership of the Balance of State, and then also with all of the local housing coalitions who are part of the Balance of State Continuum of Care, and then coordinate closely with the Chittenden County Homeless Alliance in our advocacy. Thanks.
Thank you. So we also invited staff from the Land Access and Opportunity Board who aren't here yet, but we have 2 members of the Land Access and Opportunity Board here. So maybe we could introduce ourselves in the spirit of transparency and maybe answer questions till they come so we can keep moving. So I'm Brian Gina, as you know. I was appointed to the Land Access and Opportunity Board by the National Association of Social Workers Vermont chapter.
I am Emily Ferris Duncan. I was appointed by the Everytown Project, a project of NEFOC.
And there's not a seat for House members on the board. It just so happens that Emily got appointed before she won, and I got appointed after by these organizations. So, but we're here, so at least there are board members present. If the staff can't make it, we can weigh in to whatever extent comfortable. So the next question is, and we'll go in the same order. What is the impact of this public health emergency that what is the impact of this public health emergency that is related to housing and land access? What do you see or hear happening on the front lines? What have you directly witnessed or indirectly bear witness to?
Kind of a large question.
Yeah. Give some examples, there's a lot going on.
Yeah, well, on our research side of the work that we do, we have interviewed a total of 276 people in 2 different phases. So one was 76 and one was 200. And in the research, what we learned was that 45% of the people that we interview, whether or not they were evicted, they lived in an unhealthy housing situation in their last permanent housing, unhealthy or unsafe housing situation in their last permanent housing. We also know that around 80% of the people who we interviewed, which were volunteers, not necessarily our clients, who they live with some kind of disability. That's not an exact number, it's somewhere around 80%. And that there's quite a large number who had housing insecurity in the first place when they were as children, and over 20%, like 28%, who were in foster care as children. And so we know that this is impacting people with disabilities and people who have really traumatic childhoods more than others. And then in addition to that, what we've actually seen on the ground and how this has played out is that there's incredible disability discrimination within our systems and within the current administration. And I would probably say that this spans before the current administration, just the systemic barriers for people living with disabilities or complex needs to get to all of our systems, but certainly our emergency housing system. And in fact, some of it is very intentional. It is like to root out some of that, and because we work directly on people's vouchers. And in the last several months, we saw, we have 158 clients who we renew their vouchers every month, and we had, as of September, we did, and we had 124 who had used their 80 days and were exited. And of those 124, we had about 62 whose complex needs were so severe that we were afraid of their catastrophic outcomes. We saw in 1 week's time, from November 27th to December 4th, we saw 7 of our clients die outside. And we had or in the hospital who had been outside. We had 7 of our clients be hospitalized for hypothermia. We had a client who got an infection because he didn't have access to his insulin and his oxygen in his legs that then spread throughout his entire body. He ended up having open heart surgery and having to have all his teeth removed to get the infection out. So he's permanently changed. As a result of this, we have a client who was brutally raped and hospitalized, and we have a client in a wheel, these are just some examples, in a wheelchair who was multiple times pushed out of his wheelchair, pushed with his phone stamped on, for the purpose of people that pushed him out so that he couldn't call for help. And then we have one client in a lesser, what seemed less catastrophic, but more emotionally, is that he told us that he had reported that people who call themselves the hobo hunters, which is apparently across the state, had poured maple syrup all over him while he was sleeping. And he ended up having to like find and access clothing, which the different didn't find. So that's just some very small examples. This is what we're seeing every single day. And then the access to getting back in shelter, though the legislature prepared for this same population to be able to get back in, it took us over a month to get many of our clients back inside because of intentional limited access to hotels that were actually available and could have been used. So we have seen pretty serious bias in this approach.
Thanks. Frank?
Yeah, I think just building on what Brenda said and kind of moving forward, and obviously I should have mentioned before, we work super closely with Brenda on all of this. So as you all may know, the caps, Brenda mentioned the 80-day cap, which went into effect in mid-September, and also there's a cap of 1,100 rooms available between mid-September and when winter weather kicked in on December 1st. Those caps go back into effect on April 1st. And then obviously, so one of the big pushes we have right now is to use the BAA to extend winter weather protections through the end of this fiscal year. And the reason why is because even looking at the point in time count, which is, we know in undercount, we had about 3,500 Vermonters unhoused on any single night last year. We have a statewide shelter bed capacity of 585 households. And so obviously there's a massive gap there. And so the GA program has really served as a backstop for vulnerable Vermonters to ensure that they can access shelter while we build towards a kind of permanent solution. And just looking at the most recent data, which we know is also likely an undercount, we have at least 457 households who are currently sheltered in GA under winter weather protections who have used their 80 nights. And that includes 590 adults and 160 children. And so absent change in the BAA, on April 1st, all of those folks are going to get exited into a homelessness response system that has zero capacity. And so we'll be back to where we were in September, when we literally had shelter providers providing tents to families with children, tents to people on oxygen. And so very much a crisis point coming up. And I don't know, would it be helpful to also talk about the housing side a little bit, or do we want to just stick with that piece for now?
Why don't you take a minute and say what you want to say?
Definitely. And so I think the other kind of immediate crisis point around in the opportunity we have in the BAA is you all may recall, for those of y'all who were in the legislature last year, the budget bill last year included if there were leftover COVID relief, the ARPA dollars, VHCB, which is kind of the mothership for ensuring that we have a pipeline of permanently affordable housing in Vermont, was supposed to get, I think it was $30 million. And right now, VHCB has $50 million in project requests and only $13 million available. And why that's so important is because we need to kind of keep that pipeline going so that we have more and more units coming online so that we can actually exit people and provide people with permanent housing. And so the governor moved those leftover ARPA funds into general fund dollars. And so VHEB didn't end up getting into that. And so VHEB has a huge gap in available cash for projects. And so we're going to see the pipeline of new permanently affordable housing slow down drastically in this fiscal year unless they get more money. I think from our perspective, we have like two emergencies that are interconnected. We have the obviously human emergency of GA, and on April 1, if those winter weather is not extended, we're literally going to be giving tents out to families again. And then the other emergency of we're just going to not be able to solve the crisis if we don't keep the pipeline going. And so we need to be able to ensure that BHCB can continue to fund projects that could come online or that could begin development this fall or this spring, I should say.
Thank you. I'm glad that you shared that additional piece because it's important to remember that we have to address shelter for all while creating housing for all, that if we focus on one or the other, people are going to needlessly suffer. Earlier, we didn't explain what the Land Access and Opportunity Board is, and so I thought I'd take a second to explain. Like, the Land Access and Opportunity Board was created to address disparities and promote equity in the housing system for people who've historically been marginalized. That's not the statutory language, that's my summary. But in the Land Access and Opportunity Board, I brought to the board concerns about the current experience of unsheltered homeless people, and talked about how that population is disproportionately made up of the other populations who've been disenfranchised historically, and how until as the Land Access and Opportunity Board worked on creating housing options and housing solutions, that we had a moral obligation to also look out for the people who are unsheltered, and the board unanimously agreed and created a Shelter for All committee. And I have many things that I do. One of them is I work with the People's Kitchen as a volunteer. And in September, when the mass evictions from the hotel started, we started feeding people 1 night a week, 2 nights a week. Now we go out 3 nights a week and we feed people in the middle of the night who have nowhere to go. And so what we started doing with the LEOB did is when I made this presentation, I started going to the people on the streets on Zoom on my phone to be part of the Shelter for All meetings, and we started gathering testimony. So the stories I was hearing from people have been recorded and on the record, and they're heartbreaking when you hear the level of suffering, needless suffering people are going through, who have historically been stigmatized and punished and judged for generations, and that almost every single person, like Brenda said, has DCF involved in their past. So it's not even current. They were DCF kids who the state failed, or people with disabilities who the state just has failed to take care of. And so just to answer this question, what is the impact and what's happening on the front lines? What have I witnessed, or what has the LAB witnessed? I'll just give you like an example or two. We give people tents, okay? So we bring food and tents, we give them stuff. People who are screaming for help, in pain, calm down, come together, like eat with us. There's peace, there's a sense of belonging and happiness. And then we leave and the police roll up and take all their stuff and throw it out. I've seen 40 women sleeping in a pile with 3 blankets with a few men on the outside of this like pile guarding them because of the level of sexual assault that occurs. The women are disappearing, and the police are investigating it. But there's women who are going missing on the streets, and the suspicion is that they're being kidnapped into human trafficking. I could go on, but like, we're talking about atrocities, human rights violations. And we have gone to the governor repeatedly pleading for help, and he's denying the problem. So is there anything you want to say on behalf of the board? Because I'm on that committee, I don't.
Yeah, no, I.
Okay, just want to make sure there's space, but I just wanted to say something on behalf of LAOB since our staff aren't here yet, so I don't want to take up too much space, so so the next question will be, and I guess I kind of answered this for LAOB a little bit already. What is your organization doing to address the public health emergency?
So that's also a big question. We are doing quite a few things. We have a couple of different aspects. First, I'm gonna talk about the two that are less upsetting. We are working right now on a project where we're going into hotels and helping people get registered to vote. And we're also putting out a questionnaire to the select board candidates and mayoral candidates and city council candidates have about 5 to 8 questions. That's not done yet. That will give them the opportunity to answer how they would address this crisis and to answer it knowing that the audience is the people who are experiencing the crisis. And we're pretty excited about that because we have built these relationships over a lot of years, and that allows us to have the opportunity to help people register and vote. And then we also will be working on our third phase of the research project, which the research project is like done in the different phases of this GA program. So we actually hope to have a fourth phase now if we can get through what we worked on with the General Assistance Emergency Health and Task Force, which 3 of us were in this room, were appointed to. And so I think that those are some good projects that we're doing. We handed out over $8,000 in tents in September. We have witnesses on the ground when there's a mass exit. We help people lift up and tell their stories. We've brought people in to testify multiple times, and we work really hard with them so that they don't just come in and put their heart on the table, but we give them the same tools and resources that those of us who have run for office or those of us that are trained to talk to press and talk to the legislature have those same understanding and tools so that when they tell their story, they can do it in a way that they leave feeling like they were able to make a change. We work to get their stories lifted up by video or however they want. We have notably sent hundreds of clients, not just clients, hundreds of people in the hotels, words in email or in messages to legislators, all the legislators, and sometimes targeted, but sometimes all the legislators over the last few years. And also, we've held a few meetings, once where the commissioner came to some hotels. We've held several meetings like that where there's informational meetings about what's going on. We go to the hotels and do informational meetings. And then during the exits, and we answer endless emergency calls, and try to meet the needs of people who are having massive emergencies that we cannot address properly. And it has been an I just want to add this, it has been extremely challenging on the mental health of everyone who's working with us, to the point of really almost feeling sometimes responsible when we hear that somebody dies because we may have known that they were in crisis and not been able to address it. And as Julie Bond at Good Samaritan Haven calls it, she says it's beyond secondary trauma, it is moral injury because the providers on the ground are being forced to carry out something that is frankly pure evil. And so we're the last, even though we do it with kindness, we are carrying out a policy that is bad policy.
Thanks, Frank.
Yeah, and I think, again, building on some of the things Brenda lifted up, obviously working really closely with Brenda on the advocacy side, to ensure that we continue to kind of have, talking with lawmakers about the importance of, fixing the issues I lifted up around the BAA, around the GA, and around the funding for VHCB. I think another big priority of ours that we're working on right now is, I had mentioned with our COC, Balance of State Continuum of Care hat, we work closely with all the local housing coalitions and help kind of staff that work. And so we're engaged in a project right now to really understand what the needs are of each of the local housing coalitions, and then, work with them to build a path to actually address those needs. So right now, at the local housing coalition level, because the situation is so dire in Vermont, a lot of folks are unable to kind of think to the future. It's just like respond, respond, respond. It's all triage because there's no capacity. And so we're trying to figure out how we can kind of move from triage to actually planning and building the infrastructure and figuring out like resource development plans so that we can really support the work at the local level going forward and understand really what it needs to look like at the local level. So like, what is the ideal homelessness response infrastructure? What does that look like in terms of shelter capacity, in terms of supports, et cetera? And then what is a path for us to move there? Both talking about federal dollars, state dollars, but also potentially private philanthropy, which I know is not ideal, but in the near term, I think it's something that we need to consider. And then last, and I think you all were talking about it when I first hopped on, like right now in the immediacy, we're really trying to figure out the potential implications of the HUD or the federal government grant freeze and what that looks like. And so we were on the phone with our national partners this morning, and trying to understand what they're hearing, what to expect. And we're really trying to understand what things might look like on the ground in Vermont if that funding stream is shut down even for a few weeks, and potential implications at the provider level. And so we'll be able to have some information to provide to y'all in the near term around that. But that's something we're just now starting to try and gather. But it is definitely a major concern that we weren't planning on dealing with, just 24 hours ago.
Thank you. So the Land Access and Opportunity Board, through the Shelter for All Committee, has started by engaging in partnership with the impacted people. That's where we started. And I don't think we can underestimate even the significance of that, because for people who have been repeatedly stigmatized and abandoned by the state, for any government body to say, we're gonna walk with you through this, is meaningful to people. But it kind of feels like when I was holding my grandmother's hand and she was dying, like there was nothing I could do, but it meant a lot to be there with her. That's kind of how it feels right now, and we're losing people every week. So I see our staff jumped on, and so maybe Ornella, I was just speaking a little bit about the LAOB's work as we went, because there's two board members here, so we were kind of, well, Emily's just like sitting with me, but like, and like, but I've been talking mostly about it, but the point is, I've been talking about our work as we go, but maybe the question we're on, and maybe you could say who you are and your role in the LAOB, and then the question maybe you can answer is, what is the LAOB currently doing to address this emergency? I started talking about engaging with people, but I didn't go further with the details, and maybe you could say more about how you're assessing what's going on around the state and trying to coordinate efforts and stuff. So I'll hand it over to our Sioux staff just to introduce yourself and maybe jump in and weigh in on what is the organization doing to address the public health emergency.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone. I'm gonna take a breath. I feel like I've been running from thing to thing this morning. My name is Sarnela Mata Figueroa, and I am Director of Community Engagement and Advocacy for the Land Access and Opportunity Board. A little bit about the LAOB. We were established in 2022 as an independent state board to address the disparities in land and home ownership for Vermont, in Vermont, for people and groups that have historically and systematically marginalized from land and home ownership. So who are the historically marginalized populations that are constituents are all poor or low income Vermonters, Vermonters with developmental disabilities, LGBTQIA Vermonters, immigrant people that are new to Vermont, and Vermonters who are people of color. And we have some agreements that we use no matter where we are. I don't know if Brian shared those with you all, but I'll make sure everybody that's here gets them at some point. We have been doing so many different things in this state. I started to kind of write down some of the things Jean, if you do want to introduce yourself too, and then I can talk about some of the things we're doing.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jean Hamilton, and I'm the co-director of the LAOB, and officially my title is Director of Program Development. Thanks for having us here today.
Okay, so we are connecting across systems to be able to support innovative approaches. We're dreaming and weaving with community organizers, frontline support system workers, and anybody that knows firsthand what their communities need and what's happening on the ground. And we're also trying to build support systems for these exhausted essential workers. We're working to build infrastructure too, to support farmers. We're listening and learning and learning and listening to make sure that we're connected and learning from one another. And we're encouraging a focus on humanity, connection, and community-led initiatives and strategies, as that being like the ground from where we all are going to be doing better. Jean, do you want to add anything more? We enacted a Shelter for All committee, and we've been talking to folks who are unhoused. What else would you say that we've been doing?
I think we're here mostly to talk about the Shelter for All work. Brian, Representative Chena, can you confirm that?
Yeah, we're trying to click a button so we can see your face better on this screen.
That's okay. I don't need that.
You can't really see it. Oh, there we go. Now we know. Next time someone there, someone had to click the screen, all right? So the question you walked in on is what are we doing specifically? And I talked a bit about how we had the committee and we've heard testimony. What I was wondering is if you could say a little bit about the work you're doing to assess what is happening in communities around the state and how you're trying to bring us together and share that wisdom and work.
Great. I mean, I will just come clean to you all up front because it will help me talk more honestly that this day I am feeling like very overwhelmed, as I imagine many of you are feeling, in terms of like, how do we work? Where do we prioritize? What does it mean to both be a board that is intended to meet people's immediate material needs so that they can participate in policymaking and then create the systems and conditions for impacted community members to participate in policy? That question over the last year has been one that I felt we were working towards and building towards. And then in the last 3 weeks has felt like, oh boy, you know, what is up and what is down. So I just want to be really honest with you all of that. Like for me, as one of the 2 staff people of the Land Access and Opportunity Board, I feel like we need to be very thoughtful about should we be dedicating our resources to plug in some of the immediate gaps that, for instance, our refugee resettlement organizations are facing in immediately welcoming community members who have just arrived. Should we be plugging the gaps in the shelter system, or should we be supporting systemic solutions that both empower the shelter system to serve better and also help our community members participate in those systems and in actually leading those systems? So those are really the questions that we've been asking as we go to community. The values that lead us when we go to community are that we believe that those who are most impacted have the best solutions because they understand the problems most deeply. And so wherever we go with our committee meetings, our conference workshops, we make, we prioritize all of our, like the vast majority of our effort into making sure that those who are impacted can participate and be voices of leadership. Within the Shelter for All work, I think you all are familiar enough with like how devastating this has been since last September, plus years. This is very complicated work, and it has felt very complicated for us to navigate, like, how do we prioritize voices of people who are so marginalized that they are fighting for their very life? How do we welcome them into policymaking? And the question that has continued to emerge every time we hear from our community members is, are the primary problems that there's not enough resourcing within the existing system, or is the existing system so broken that we need a transformation? And how can we work on both of those things at the same time? Frank, I'm really happy you're here, and I'm sorry if I missed if you spoke earlier, I'm sorry I missed what you were going to say, because I think, over these last few months, like our attempts to work with the HHAV partners is very representative of how challenging this moment is as we start and we try to build a little bit of momentum, and then the rug is pulled, and that rug pulling literally means people start dying. Like, this is just, and not just people who are living outside, but also like our frontline workers who are serving these people. We have key organizers and key support staff who go offline because they're so devastated and in despair that they face their own mental health crises. And so I know that it is partly my job to show up and say, here's all the good work we're doing and here's the solutions we've found. But I just feel compelled on this day particularly to just be really frank with you that we will continue to listen to our community members who are most impacted and continue to fumble and explore, like, what does this mean as resources seem to evaporate overnight.
Thank you. So in the final 5 minutes, I was thinking maybe each guest organization could take a minute to answer this question, and then I would like a minute at the end to share some legislative actions that I've been working on with unhoused people that are coming up, and I'm inviting all of our partners to join in on. So starting with Brenda, what should the state do? How can the state help right now? In a minute, if you can just, I know this is probably a lot, but if you can
I think there's a few things. I think that we have to find some way to make it safe for people with experience to testify, which I think there's a challenge this year in a committee that's been normally safe. I think that there needs to be, we need to all be working to extend the GA program, the winter weather program. And that is happening in the House Human Services that way. And hopefully it will continue to do that, but we need to keep pushing along, especially as other funding cuts come, because I think that that's where the scare is gonna happen. I woke up a little panicked about that. And I also think that there's going to be real incredible work that's gonna start in House Human Services around the GA program as a whole. And we need to really center ourselves in that people deserve to be sheltered until they're permanently housed, and how we're gonna do that. Like, how we're gonna make it happen, and how are we gonna, at this point, how are we gonna fill the gaps in, obviously, in rental subsidies, which the only reason that I remained housed I'm gonna just be really upfront, the only reason that I remained housed until right through last year when this has been my first year out of poverty in my adult life, and it was my Section 8 voucher. And so otherwise, I don't think that we would have had housing, because I was destitute. So I really want us to be thoughtful about how we're gonna fill gaps, and not think like we have to tighten our belt in a way that that particularly on the backs of the most marginalized, most vulnerable people in our state, that's actually the needs we need to fill the most.
Thanks. Frank?
Yeah, I agree with everything Brenda said in terms of priorities. And I think the only thing I'd add is potential, and this will just be once we get more information around, what's currently happening with the federal grant freeze, and the implications for Vermont, which could be like literally shelters not having funds to keep their doors open in the very immediate future. And so there may be some very concrete things that we may come forward with in terms of state requests to back up the system until the federal government figures out what's going on with, their whatever they're doing. They're playing politics with people thing. So yeah, but we'll be able to circle back. We should have hopefully more clarity about the federal implications by towards the end of this week, and can circle back with this group if helpful, however appropriate. There may be some very specific things coming out of that.
Thank you. Jean and Ornella? Any thoughts on what should the state do, or how can this caucus help?
I think this caucus can help by continuing to reinforce and spread the messaging that when we do not take care of our community members, it costs our whole society more. And so all of these problems, as they compound, will lead to more and more and more costs that the state will incur. Ornella, do you have another thing you want to add?
Yeah, and with that is that I keep encouraging every legislator I talk to filter anything that comes in front of them through the lens of how will this impact those who are most marginalized?
Thank you. Thank you. So the just in the final minute, what I would say is there's two things to bring to people's attention. There's currently a resolution being drafted that's going to declare a public health emergency. It doesn't have the power of a governor's declaration. It's a symbolic statement, but it commits the legislature to devoting its attention to providing shelter for all until we have housing for all, and it calls on the governor to do everything within his power to make sure that people have shelter for all until we have housing for all. And then I'm working on an amendment, and so is Senator Vihovsky. They might be slightly different, but what they both do is cut the pay of the governor, his pay raise that he got in the last budget. He negotiated a pay raise for himself and hundreds of his highest paid staff, and reallocates that money to emergency housing. So more to come if anyone's interested. It would be nice when I have a draft to hear from advocates and see, just to make sure we have a good, it makes sense. So I just want to share those two actions that we're looking at doing and open to more ideas. Thank you, anyone. Any final comments before we wrap up in the next 30 seconds? Seeing no, yes, seeing no.
Like one thing too, like in your committees, I think one thing that would also be helpful is, I think one of the concerning things is like building on what Ornella was saying around kind of reframing what safety and security should mean and how, like, making sure our budgets reflect that going forward. Like I think the fiscal notes that we're seeing and the use of like kind of the disingenuous use of fiscal notes, like when we're talking about anything that has to do with housing or helping people, they'll have a fiscal note attached and they'll say this costs so much, how can we afford it, blah blah blah. So I think building on what Ornella said about the long-term costs and even the short-term costs of not doing it, I think is important. But also like on other issues that have huge fiscal impacts where they just ignore that completely, I think lifting that up in your committees, like why aren't you considering the fiscal implications of this? So like concrete example is last year there was that felony larceny expansion bill. There was no fiscal note attached to that. There is massive state fiscal impact for passing a new felony law in terms of incarceration costs, in terms of prosecution costs, in terms of court costs, and they just ignored all of that. And so I think the more we can hold legislators and the kind of the administration accountable to the actual costs of the things they're doing, not to mention how backward it is in terms of actually addressing public safety. So I think any opportunities for that would be huge.
Thank you. So speaking of the true cost, it's time for us to go hear the governor's budget address. And we will be weighing in on that at our next caucus meeting.